War is not a modern invention. It is not a product of civilization, of governments, of religion, or of greed. It is older than all of those things. And the evidence was sitting in the mud beside a Kenyan lagoon for 10,000 years, waiting for someone to find it. In 2012, a team of researchers from Cambridge and Stony Brook University were excavating a dried ancient lagoon bed at a site called Nataruk near Lake Turkana in northwest Kenya. They were looking for the remains of an ancient shoreline community. What they found instead stopped the excavation completely. 27 skeletons, all of them in the positions they had fallen, none of them buried. One adult male had obsidian arrow points, the ancient equivalent of arrowheads, still embedded in his knee joint and chest cavity. A woman in the late stages of pregnancy lay face down in what would have been shallow water. Her hands were bound when she died. The position of her wrists, still preserved in the sediment, showed the binding clearly. She had not fallen. She had been put there. The researchers spent 4 years analyzing the bones before publishing their findings in the journal Nature in 2016. What they concluded was careful and specific. This was not an accident. This was not a single fight that escalated. The pattern of injuries across the 27 individuals, blunt force trauma to the skulls, obsidian points embedded in bone at angles consistent with being shot rather than stabbed, injuries on the hands and forearms consistent with defensive wounds, pointed to one conclusion. This was an organized attack. A group of people had planned it, carried it out, and left 10,000 years ago. Before farming existed in this part of the world, before any permanent settlement, before any concept of borders or kingdoms or states. This is what makes Nataruk important. Not just that the violence happened. Violence is ancient. Individual acts of killing go back to the very beginning of our species and long before. What matters about Nataruk is the organization, the coordination. The fact that multiple attackers came from a distance, used ranged weapons, targeted a specific group, and killed them all. That is not a fight. That is a raid. And a raid requires planning communication, a shared objective, and the ability to coordinate with other people over time. It requires, in other words, exactly the kind of social intelligence we have always assumed was used to build things rather than destroy them. The lead researcher on the Nataruk study was Dr. Marta Murazan-Lar at Cambridge University. She described the site as representing a level of lethal intergroup aggression that had previously been assumed to require social complexity, cities, hierarchies, resource competition at scale. What Nataruk showed was that the capacity for organized violence came first. The complexity came after. But here is where it gets more complicated, because Nataruk is not the only site. And the question of whether organized violence is ancient and innate, or whether it only emerges under specific conditions, is one of the most contested debates in the entire field of human evolutionary biology. In 2016, the same year the Nataruk findings were published, a team at the University of Utah published a meta-analysis looking at all known skeletal evidence of violence from pre-state societies around the world. What they found was that rates of violent death varied enormously across time and place. Some sites showed almost no evidence of interpersonal violence at all. Others showed violence rates comparable to the most dangerous cities in modern history. The pattern was not random. The high violence sites were almost always associated with one specific condition: resource stress, drought, famine, population pressure, competition for territory. The low violence sites were almost always periods of abundance, which means the question of whether war is innate to human nature may be asking the wrong thing entirely. The right question might be what conditions turn a peaceful group violent, and what conditions keep a violent group at peace. This is where the chimpanzee data becomes important and deeply uncomfortable. Jane Goodall first documented what she called the 4-year war between chimpanzee groups at Gombe Stream in Tanzania between 1974 and 1978, a community that had been unified split into 2 groups. Over 4 years, the larger group systematically hunted and killed every adult male from the smaller group. It was not random violence. It was coordinated, targeted, and persistent. It looked, in every way that mattered, like warfare. Chimpanzees share approximately 98.7% of their DNA with humans. The capacity for organized lethal violence appears to exist in both species independently, which suggests it may be very old indeed. Old enough to have been present in the common ancestor we shared with chimpanzees roughly 6 million years ago. But here is the counter-argument that researchers like anthropologist Douglas Fry have made with significant force. Bonobos also share approximately 98.7% of our DNA. Bonobos are highly social. highly intelligent, and have never been documented engaging in anything resembling warfare. They resolve conflict through social bonding rather than violence. Two species equally close to us. One that wages war, one that doesn't. Which means the genetics alone cannot explain what happened at Nataruk. Something else made that choice. And here is the thing that the bones cannot tell us. We know 27 people died. We know they were killed deliberately and with organization. We know the attack was planned. We do not know what started it. We do not know if the attackers had been attacked first. We do not know if there had been years of low-level conflict before this. We do not know if someone was taken, or starved, or pushed out of territory they depended on for survival. We know the end of one story. We have no idea what the beginning looked like. Dr. Lahr was careful about this in her paper. She noted that the Nataruk massacre cannot be used to prove that war is innate to human nature, only that the capacity for it is ancient. Those are different claims. One says we are built for violence. The other says we are built for the possibility of violence, under the right conditions. The wrong conditions, in the presence of a specific kind of pressure that tips a group from cooperation into something else entirely. Here is what we know for certain. 10,000 years ago, a group of hunter-gatherers living beside a lake in Kenya encountered another group. Someone made a decision. The decision was carried out with weapons, with coordination, with intent. 27 people died in the shallows. Their bones preserved the moment perfectly, down to the binding on a pregnant woman's wrists, down to the obsidian point still sitting in a man's knee joint. They had no armies, no governments, no borders, no religion to justify the killing, and no state to organize it. They had something older than all of that, something that was apparently already in us before we built a single city or wrote a single word or drew a single border on a single map. War is not a modern invention. That is the one thing Nataruk proved beyond any argument. The uncomfortable question, the one the bones cannot answer and the one researchers are still arguing about, is whether that means it was inevitable, whether the first war was waiting to happen from the moment the first two groups of humans found themselves wanting the same lake, or whether there was a version of that morning in Kenya where someone made a different choice and nothing happened at all, and we simply cannot know, because the only people who knew what that morning felt like have been in the ground for 10,000 years, and they left us only their